This presentation will be on PM 2.5, what it is, how traffic relates to it, and simple ways to reduce it. We'll cover the health impacts, where the hotspots are, and practical responses to mitigate exposure. We'll also cover how, depending on where you are, you may or may not be less or more exposed to particulate matter 2.5. We'll talk about how traffic directly contributes to overall exposure, and then we'll talk about the positive impacts of minor reductions, even where regulations are already met. There are various types of particulate matter, such as particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5. When discussing particulate matter, the general trend is that the smaller the particulate matter, the farther it can reach in someone's respiratory tract, and it determines how long it can stay there. While particulate matter 10, which is particulate matter 10 micrometers across, is generally from road dust, construction, and agriculture, particulate matter 2.5 are fine particles that mostly come from combustion and chemical reactions in the air. These tiny particles bypass the upper body's defenses, and evidence suggests that long-term exposure can lead to cardiovascular and respiratory disease, premature death, and several chronic outcomes. A key point of this presentation will be that risk does not suddenly vanish at the legal limit, and lower is always better. This analysis estimates how many cases of certain outcomes can be attributed to observed particulate matter 2.5 concentrations, and then the study aggregates these to counties and then the state. The outcome that this study measured was mortality and other injuries like strokes, lung cancer, asthma, Alzheimer's, and low birth weight. In 2016, about 99% of Texans resided in areas exceeding the WHO annual guideline. The annual WHO guideline, at least for that time, was 5 micrograms per meters cubed. However, nearly all Texans lived in an area that was above this guideline, especially in eastern Texas. The model from the study attributes roughly 8.4 thousand premature deaths to long-term particulate matter 2.5 exposure for the year 2016, which is about 1 in 25 deaths statewide. Ischemic heart disease contributes the largest share of the mortality burden. So hotspots, or the areas with the largest absolute burdens, were populous counties like Harris, Dallas, Bexar, and Tarrant. It is important to note that county borders do not mitigate PM themselves, and so because PM can travel, multi-county efforts need to be implemented in the overall exposure mitigation of PM. So in simple terms, the analysis and the study worked through a risk model, which was a small percent increase in disease per unit, microgram per meter cubed, particulate matter 2.5 concentration, which was a beta coefficient. And this beta coefficient can be compared to other beta coefficients in other areas. Inputs per tract, which is inputs per area, was PM 2.5 concentration multiplied by the population and then multiplied by baseline rates. The sum across these areas were then the county and statewide totals. For this study, all modeling has a certain uncertainty. Using 2016 data locks in that year's patterns, and modeled PM 2.5 fills areas without dense monitors. So outcome-specific baselines aren't perfect at that track scale. These potential downsides may shift numbers locally, but the overall trend will remain the same. Traffic-related particulate matter 2.5 shows us that measuring particulate matter concentration isn't always consistent. Near-road environments can show steep spatial gradients, which means concentrations can be several times higher right at the curb, but then drop off toward urban background over the first few hundred meters, downwind and over altitude differences. Morning and evening rush hours drive the largest daily peaks, the traffic volume, and cold starts. Tall buildings close to the road trap pollutants and slow the dilution of particulate matter. Another factor to consider is heavy-duty diesel traffic, which tends to have more black carbon and ultrafine number counts. Tailpipe emissions produce black carbon and primary organics, and these dominate curbside soot and ultrafine peaks, especially from diesel engines. However, a rising fraction of particulate matter 2.5 comes from sources that are not exhaust. Braking generates metal particles, tires shed rubber and zinc, and vehicles resuspend dust already on the road surface. Even with cleaner engines, these non-exhaust sources directly contribute to particulate matter exposure, and will continue to do so unless they are addressed directly. So, interpreting data for shorter scale particulate matter concentration fluctuations can be especially difficult because of the previously discussed variation. For day-to-day decisions when interpreting data, it's better to rely on AQI and local sensor network, and you should note that short-term peaks may not always show up in daily averages. Now, considering traffic. Individuals can reduce their exposure by timing activities and choosing cleaner routes. MERV13 filters, or HEPA purifiers, cut PM 2.5 effectively. At sites like schools, anti-idling policies and bowl design, vegetation barriers, which would be dense, tall, with minimal gaps in between the vegetation, redirect and dilute particulate matter plumes. But the placement must avoid trapping the pollutants and reducing their dilution. Buildings near corridors benefit from upgraded filtration and controlled ventilation during peaks in concentration. And then system-wide retrofitting heavy-duty diesels with particulate controls and moving fleets towards electrification would deliver a large impact on reduced exposure. Traffic flow improvements reduce stop-and-go emissions, while brake pad standards, truck rerouting, and regular street sweeping address non-exhaust and dust.